Dr. Bob Christensen. I'm glad to be with you again today, and I'm really pleased today to have a very special guest, a friend of mine, and one of the people that you know very well, Congressman Bob Beauprez. Well, Congressman, it's really great to see you here.
It's awfully good to be with you. It always is good to be in your company.
Thank you, and you're always so gracious and so forth. But I thought since we had the opportunity to have him with us for a few minutes today, that we just talk a couple words about what happens in this nation of ours as we see separation and divorce occur and so forth. And you know probably even better than I do the tremendous harm that comes to a country, but to a city, to a family, and so forth. And I think from your point of view, you have a large family and so forth. You recognize the tremendous harm that will come as we begin to split up and not stand on our covenant marriage vows.
Well, you used the right word, covenant.
That's right.
It goes beyond the normal handshake contractual agreement that we see routinely out in kind of the rest of our life. I had a very good teacher, my mother and dad. They were married in 1940. Dad passed away a little bit over a year ago now. But I often tell people, and hopefully it tells them a little bit about who I am, trying to tell them where I came from and the examples I learned from. There was a couple of things that were absolute with Mom and Dad. Obviously, when they said I do, they meant it. They spent 64 and a half years together. And I lived with them until I got married, and then next door to them for the next 24 years, and then I was only about a quarter of a mile away from them after that. I kept a pretty good eye on them. And in those 64 plus years, Bob, I never once wondered if my dad really loved my mother or where he was spending the night. And it wasn't because life was easy for them. They were Depression-era kids. They very much had to scrap and save and struggle and were threatened with foreclosure, farm, ranch families. It was very tough for almost all of their life. It wasn't because anything was handed to them, quite the opposite. They worked very, very hard together. Raised us 4 kids, but they did it well. Not only did I understand that they knew what a covenant was all about, when he loved my mother, but I always knew where we would be at 8 o'clock Sunday morning, too, because he knew who that covenant was with.
That's right.
It was a 3-part covenant. It was he, my mother, and God. They taught me that. And I, you know, that's not unique. That started back in the Garden of Eden, the way I read the book.
That's right.
And unfortunately, I think sometimes we think that things are top down, whether it comes from the government or some higher this or that, but it's really about people.
It is.
And either you believe that we're created in our Maker, in God's image and likeness, or you don't. I happen to believe that.
Right.
So we really have God within us.
Mm-hmm.
And when we take that solemn oath,
right,
most solemn oath that I think any of us ever take, is to trust and ask God to bless our bond of marriage, that covenant of marriage. Who are we to think we can break that? Society is built from that basic unit, right, husband and wife, one family at a time. And when those families begin to crumble, how can communities and states and societies survive?
That's right.
That's why I think it's so very, very important that all of us, however we can, and yes, I'm an elected official, but Claudia and I proudly accept the role of being an example that marriage is as serious, as basic, as big a blessing as it gets. And that's how societies hold together.
That's right. You and I both grew up, I think, on ranches and farms and so forth, and you probably milked a lot more cows than I did, but if somebody had paid me to milk 30 cows, and we had more of a Hereford sort of ranch, but they'd pay me to milk those cows, and I had a contract with them. I'd have to do it or they wouldn't pay me. But marriage is not like that. It's my marriage vows, or what did I say I would do. It doesn't matter whether my wife ever lived up to any part of what she said. And the same is true in reverse. If she made that vow with me, then she would stand on that. And if I walked off in some other way, that's my problem. But she would continue to stand. And God's covenant is so much stronger, just as you mentioned, that if we will stand on that word. I've said many times, there's not a judge in this country that can disavow and break a covenant of marriage in a Christian family, because we're based on our word with God, and God's not going to release us. So what are we going to do? That judge says, well, this is dissolved. If he said your relationship with the Father was dissolved, you wouldn't believe him. But we walk in, and it's smoke and mirrors, and we end up believing that. I'll never forget when Lynn and I went through separation and divorce, and I didn't want it. And the judge says, well, doctor, what will you have to say? I said, well, my covenant of marriage didn't start in this courtroom, nor does it end here. That was the best statement I could have made. And I think we have to stand and believe and expect to see God work in all of our lives. And then he brings that beauty through the marriage of your mother and father, and through you and Claudia, and through Lynn and I, because of our just really walking together and letting the sharp edges get cut off a bit and smooth down, and we begin to really appreciate one another. Well, Bob, I appreciate you not only being my congressman, but your being here for a few minutes this morning just to talk about this little subject.
Well, it's a real treat for me. If I might, I'll mention a truly unique opportunity I had recently.
Yes.
And that was serving as the officiant at my son and now my new daughter-in-law's wedding. And as I witnessed, obviously, my own marriage for now 35 plus years, I already mentioned about my wonderful parents. Now I had the opportunity to ask God to join us.
That's right.
To be kind of his intercessor for a moment, and bring together my son and now new daughter-in-law into that bond of marriage. And I reflected as I wrote the ceremony, worked with them to write it. I asked them to remember that I doubt it was totally by accident that it was another mother, another parent, who had a lot of hope in her heart about 2,000 years ago, a little village called Cana, not far from the Sea of Galilee, and that it was at his at that wedding where he performed his very first miracle, and thus blessed that wedding, but all weddings, then, as well as forever. I asked my kids to think about that, how special a wedding is. And you know, he made that so vividly so. Marriage isn't about being easy.
That's right.
Marriage, and we're so short-minded, closed-minded, I think, as human beings. It's our nature.
Right.
To not understand why trials and tribulations are put in front of us. But that's what that in sickness and health.
That's right.
In business is all about. We don't know what's in front of us. But I look back at my parents now and I think, wow, how they grew from all that, what an example they gave us, and how strong their marriage was. My mom still says, I talk to Dad every night before I go to bed. I said, does he talk back? She says, of course he does. And I'm sure he does.
That's neat.
Bob, it's great to be with you.
You too, Bob. Thank you so much.
God bless you.
God bless you.